It looks like we still have a couple of folks coming in, and I see that the chat box is pretty active. This is my little vacation during lockdown and COVID times. I just imagine that I pick a location and I imagine that I'm joining in from there. So thanks for sharing, everyone. Make sure that if you want to share information with the whole group, your chat box is selected as all panelists and attendees. If you just have a message for me or the other panelists, you can use the all panelists section. Before we get kicked off, there's some exciting news that I just wanted to announce for you all. And I'm going to see if I can get that to go. So I'm having some trouble, look at that, with my PowerPoint today. It just seems like it's one of those days, but I wanted to let all of our attendees know today that we have some exciting news. We have officially launched registration for UVAMC, our annual marketing conference. It is going to be virtual this year. Good news on top of good news is that members can register and participate for free this year in our virtual platform, all members. And if you're a non-member or if you're a planner, there is a way that you can register. There is a small fee to participate for 2 phenomenal days of back-to-back content. So if you're really enjoying the webinars that we're offering right now, the content that we're providing, definitely reach out to me, Corey@uniquevenues.com, and I'd be happy to either help you register or answer questions about what that content might look like later on this year in October. But that's not what you're here for today. Today, you're here to participate in our expert panel, Communicating with Confidence. We've got 3 fantastic panelists, and Joel today is going to be your moderator for the panel. I'm merely your host, getting you ready for all of the information that we're about to go through. So as a reminder, all of the attendees are on mute today, so you don't need to worry about any background noise. If you have any questions or any comments, please use the chat box to communicate to us. Additionally, if you have specific questions for the panelists that you would like to ask, please make sure that you're using the Q&A tool in the Zoom menu. By doing so, it'll actually notify me that there's a question for the panelists, and as an attendee, you can keep that menu open and give a thumbs up to any question that you particularly want to hear the answer to. That will help us manage the Q&A if we're kind of limited on time. We have polls as usual. Today we have 4. We have a venue-specific poll and a planner-specific poll. You're going to see it, all of the polls, whether you're a planner or a venue. We just ask that you only participate in the poll that is specific to how you identify. Of course, we have some venue professionals and planners who might identify as both. Feel free to participate in both. But if you're specifically venue or specifically planner, please hold your responses to that specific poll. And then we have an industry-wide poll that everyone can participate in, and of course, the session evaluation. So without further ado, I feel like I've taken some time. I'm going to pass this now over to Joel, who is going to be your moderator for the session today. So thanks for joining us.
Excellent, and thank you, Corey, and welcome to everyone that's here late morning or early afternoon, depending on where in the world you're at. We're really excited to have another industry expert panel today to talk about communicating with confidence. And the impetus for this one today is that I think we're all starting to see in various ways across all sorts of sectors out there these encouraging little pieces of optimism. Now, no one's going to pretend that we don't still have a long way to go here. There's a lot that we're still facing with the pandemic. But there are people that are going back to school. There are businesses that are reopening. There are states and providences that are meeting the next levels of their thresholds and starting to allow larger groups to get together or different kinds of gatherings to occur. And in doing all of that, it's starting to give us all, I think, a heightened sense of anxiousness about when is everything going to start to accelerate again. And while we may not have all the answers today we really wanted to focus in on how do we start communicating with the people around us, our particular audiences. If you're a venue, the planners, the clients, the groups that you're supporting. If you're a planner, the meeting attendees, the organizations that you serve, the people are saying, can we really actually do this? How do you start to communicate with them? And what are the kinds of things that you should be saying that communicate confidence in our ability to start resuming at whatever level, crawl, walk, run, that we want to start resuming these activities. And again, we're going to do some polls today. They're going to gauge what's been going on till now, who's been crawling, walking, or running, and what's going to happen in Q4. Are people going to be moving from a crawl to a walk or a walk to a run? So we'll have some information to share with you as we go today. But it's my pleasure to have three really outstanding panelists with us today. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick introduction on them. Of course, you saw their bios when you registered. First off, we have Joan Eisenstodt, who's a meeting and hospitality consultant, facilitator, and trainer. She's a very distinguished representative within the meetings and hospitality industry, and she works for Eisenstodt Associates Limited. So Joan, welcome, and thank you for being here with us today. Next up, we have Cynthia Forstmann. Cynthia is the founder and partner at CultureTalk and is a specialist in branding and helping organizations figure out their identity and their brand. And so Cynthia, thank you for joining us today. And finally, we have Chuck Salem, who's probably not a stranger to any of you out there. Chuck is the CEO and co-owner of Unique Venues, and is the person responsible for kind of helping really carve out and represent the truly unique niche of unique meeting venues across North America. So again, welcome to all three of you, and thanks for participating today. I'm going to kick us off then in the spirit of talking a little bit about optimism and hope with a question for each of you that really says, what are the emerging signs of optimism and hope that you are seeing across the meetings industry today, or really other things that might feed into it? But what are the encouraging things that you're seeing right now that are giving us a little bit of hope? And Joan, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Thanks. It's challenging, and I think finding optimism and hope has been very tough, and partly because when I see how many of my colleagues have lost jobs, it's painful, truly painful. And so I think that as we look forward, I think, to me, if I'm going to look at optimism, I think it's looking at how we use this time to really rethink and re-engage how meetings happen, how people come together. I know that every client I've ever worked with and every colleague I've ever talked to always says, people want to come together because they want to hug and they want to kiss, they want to share ideas. And so we know that we can do some of that virtually. We can't do all of it. So I think the optimism comes from being able to reinvent how we meet, how we use facilities, how we use the virtual part of our meetings, how we engage differently.
Great. Cynthia.
Great. I don't work specifically in the meetings industry, so I'm going to answer the question in two parts. One, I just got invited to my first mini conference here. I'm in the Denver area, and so I've been part of a group that's hosting a conference in November, and they are actually going to do an option for you can show up live in Denver, or you can participate remotely. So that's the first thing I've been invited to that's been live. But then I would also say, outside of the meetings industry and just in general in business, I'll pick up a little bit what Joan said. We are seeing that the great pause that we've all been put into has become very much a time of self-reflection. We've coined a term here that says the crisis is the curriculum, right? As leaders, as organizational leaders, there isn't any better time than now to really be practicing what it is that we're all about, and because this is when it gets tried, right? This is when our ideas about who we are and what we stand for are really being put to the test. So I'm for the great lessons we're all learning rapidly.
That's great. And I think we can certainly relate to that here at Unique Venues in terms of using the time during the pause to think about who we want to become. And so, Chuck, what are the signs of optimism that you're seeing right now from the Unique Venues perspective? Chuck, you're on mute. Chuck?
I do that all the time. I always do that. So what I was saying is first of all, it's strange to be on this side of the expert panel because I'm typically in Joel's position, so this is kind of fun for me. So I actually am going to share some actual data and information. We track constantly what is happening at unique venues. I mean, we just keep our finger constantly on the pulse. You know, it's like almost an obsession. How many leads do we have? How many leads? When I come into work every day, we use Microsoft Teams. When I come into work every day, the first person I write to is Stephanie Watson, who oversees our lead department. And the first question I say is, can you give me some good news today? And that good news that I'm looking for is, what was in the queue when you came to work today? And the optimism that I can share is that we are having day after day after day after day of double-digit leads. And it's been a long time since that has happened. So what's the time frame for those leads? The time frame for those leads are really 2021. It's not so much 2020. We're seeing some 2021, 2022 leads that are coming through. We're seeing more life event leads than we typically do. So one of the things that I would say that, you know, we just found this out today, 61% of the venues that we work with invite weddings, for instance, into their venue. And that is where we're seeing a lot of increase. We're also starting to see increases in the corporate world as well. So companies are starting to kind of dip their toe in the water. So I think the greatest optimism I can share is all of the upticks that we're seeing, not only in traffic, but in actual lead generation. So really, that's the optimism I can share.
That's encouraging.
So I want to jump into that because I think that one of the things when I said about how we use spaces differently, and this is for me part of, this is not a commercial for unique venues, although I guess it is because I'm here. It's also that one of the things that those of us, especially those of us who work mainly in the association meetings world, that we're looking at is how to use spaces differently. So we may be going to virtual meetings. Some groups are going to hybrid, meaning there will be, as Cynthia just said, some people will be meeting physically together. Others may be at a distance. What I'm hoping, one of the things we can do, and this is where I think unique venues facilities have a great advantage, is that in the places where we are allowed to have maybe 10 people up to 50 people, and it varies, and it's going to continue to vary, I believe, in the US and Canada, and really around the world, because I'm watching what goes on since most of the meetings I'm involved in have international participants. So what we're looking at is how we can have those who can come together in small groups so that they can then in a sense, be their own breakout. So you've got, let's say, a session that's delivered virtually, and then around the world, you have people in groups of 10 or however many can meet, distanced, face masked when needed, to gather and then have, in essence, an assignment to talk about what they heard. So you get that combination. And what I think the industry overall hasn't done is looked at that as an option for how we can, in a sense, have the best of both worlds. It's I don't know if this is it's realism. I think that we're not going to see really big meetings again for some time, and I think that we all have to be realistic about it. So we have to figure out, what do we do to bring people together and make it so that they have the bigger education and then the smaller conversations that everybody wants.
Joan, if I could chime in on that, I think about the word experience. So prior to COVID, one of the things besides just meeting is that people were looking for a meeting or event experience at the venue they're going to. And our unique sites have that advantage. And so don't just, I would challenge you to not only communicate, talk about, develop, and communicate with potential clients how you can help them meet, but I would also talk about how you can help them experience. So developing unique experiences at your venue that provide still within all of the guidelines and safety guidelines, that becomes a unique selling proposition for you. So.
And I want to, Joel, sorry, I want to just
No,
add
go ahead.
one of, Chuck knows this, and some of those listening, and by the way, Sharon Cheng, thank you for hub and spoke model. Thank you for the shout out for that, for the terminology. One of the things that I think that we all need to be more aware of, one of the greatest issues right now of wearing masks is that people who are deaf or hard of hearing are not able to communicate. So if I could give a huge recommendation to all the unique venues properties and to all the planners, there are now wonderful masks that have clear fronts, so that, because if you're not familiar with using sign language, a lot of it has to do with your eyes and your mouth, and your hands. So the ability to see and communicate becomes a big issue. So if you want to differentiate yourself, do the things that are incredibly inclusive, so that and market that, so that people know that you understand. So it's Chuck, taking your issue of experience and ensuring that you are aware of all audiences, and you guide the clients. Those of you with facilities, you guide your clients into asking the right questions.
And again, this will be the easiest moderated panel that I'll have ever been a moderator for. So I love the dialogue that's going on today. And I think we've seen that reflected, like last month in our expert panel, we ran a poll, and there was a big uptick in terms of maybe 20% more people feeling like the meetings industry was going to change and have maybe less, large meetings and more hybrid gatherings, or have that more regularly as an option. So I think we've all kind of come through this with kind of a better understanding as to where we're headed. So it's a great segue then into saying, okay, if things are going to change, if maybe we're going to, bigger education, smaller conversations, or more regional focused things, or more unique opportunities for people to have an experience with their event, how do we start communicating right now? What can venues and planners do to communicate to their audiences about their readiness to do this? Again, we're trying to think about, how do we instill confidence? What are some of the ways that we can start to communicate, and how do we keep that nimble and flexible, right? How do we make sure that it adapts to the changing times as guidelines change and counts change? What do we tell people, and how do we keep it flexible? So who'd like to take a first shot at that?
I will.
Go for it.
One of the things that I think, and this is why it's so tough. So when I said earlier about the number of my colleagues with venues who have been laid off, it's terrifying to me, and the number of meeting planners who have lost their jobs. And so I think more than ever, it's being compassionate and being thoughtful. The relationship can sometimes be sticky, and I think that for all of us who are now, and I'm one of them, involved in helping groups look at how better to do, and Chuck, to your word, experience, to have a better virtual experience, be aware that just because we may not be doing our big meetings doesn't mean that we're any less busy. In fact, we may be more so. This is my, 410th Zoom, and this is only Wednesday. So I think that it's being respectful, and it goes back to basically marketing 101. It's, first of all, if it's on the website, it's saying what you're doing to make it better. Get some new photos, or at least illustrations, of how you're showing distance meeting. And I do want to say one quick thing, and then Cynthia, I want to ask you a question about all of this. If you're looking for a really great way to set a slightly larger meeting, if any of you watched the John Lewis part of the funeral that happened on Capitol Hill in the Rotunda, they distanced, and it was in basically theater in the round, and it was so beautiful, and it meant that you could see people. It meant you were still far apart. So begin to think about what you can put on your websites that show something a little different. And then Cynthia, this is your whole world of communicating, and I'm really curious from you, how do people better ask those questions without being and to all of you who are in sales, the pushy salespeople, I don't mean it in a bad way. It's what your job is. How do you do that?
Oh, she's frozen.
Question. Let me see if I can. Oh, am I muted? Uh-oh. Am I back?
You're good.
You're back.
I hope I didn't have too scary of a scowl on. I think a couple things. I wanted to comment on the experience piece that Chuck mentioned and Joan, you picked up on, because I think as you think about what model makes sense, how can you make people that are distanced feel like part of whatever is happening live? And I had an experience where this was really well done. And we received a package in the mail before the event. And in the package, there were, raffle tickets, and there was, everybody got a prize. And so the planners were very much able to pull people together, even though we weren't all together. So I think there's lots of creative ways to create experiences. I would say from a marketing brand standpoint, the biggest, most powerful thing you can be in any moment is authentic. And the work that we do looks at how do I create an authentic brand, but through a process that looks at who are we, right? What is our purpose? What are we, how are we uniquely a meeting, event, venue in a particular location? How do we step into authentically who we are? And I'm gonna say that even in this time of crisis, it's like we forget who we are. We get distracted by the need to talk about all the tactical things, whereas sometimes coming back to that core essence of who we are is the most powerful place that we can stand in a time of crisis and in a time of uncertainty. So whatever tactical messages need to be put out there in order to let people know how you're adapting and your flexibility still need to come from kind of an internal navigation system that is very assured of who we are. And it's almost, I used an example on a call last week. In 2009, you'll remember this story. A plane took off from LaGuardia. It was flight 1549, US Airways. And 5 miles from LaGuardia, they ran into a flock of geese. And all the engine power was lost. And that plane was actually glided to a landing on the Hudson River. So you probably remember that story. It's actually almost 11 years ago now. But what we learned later is that Captain Sully, who landed the plane, and all 155 people on board survived. What we learned later is that he was actually a former fighter pilot in the US Navy. And so if you think about that moment of crisis, what kicked in for him was years of training, years of practice, years of how do we do this every time, so that when a crisis comes up, we let that internal navigation system kick in. So I would just say from a communication standpoint, we have that in our organizations, and despite the fear and uncertainty, if we can learn to tap back into that, that's the strongest place. And there's an authenticity to it that will work for you in a way that it won't work for another organization.
I want to pick up on that as well, Cynthia. And I think, and staying also with what Chuck said about experience, and what you said, Cynthia, made me think of two interesting things. One was I was part of a discussion with some tech planners, and they were one, and I'm going to be very careful so I don't mention companies, because I think it was pretty private information. One of them had a virtual meeting instead of having their physical meeting. And again, I look for how do I take someone with a huge budget experience and scale it back. And what they did is they were able with technology to individualize the experience, literally, for each person. And what they also did, and then I'd also heard about an alumni association that couldn't meet. When I tell you what they sent, you'll figure out, I think, where it was. Because this reunion couldn't happen, they sent out from the city where it was to be crab cakes that people could cook at home, and that they could then I don't like eating when I'm on screen, but other people seem to, so they did that. And then the tech company sent out, and they also, this was interesting to me, the carbon footprint for doing this next piece, what I'll tell you, was less than it would have been had all of these people come from around the world. So they sent out the makings for pizza, including shipping it overseas from the US. And so that people could participate while they're eating their pizza. So to me, what that says is individualize some of what you do to market what you have, how you're working things. You know, everybody's sending masks, everybody's sending stuff to be safe, hand sanitizers and so on. Come up with something that's very specific to the clients you want to attract. And I have always believed that the more we partner, the more that we educate each other about how we're working. And this goes back to Cynthia, what you said about authenticity. If I'm a planner and I'm planning, Chuck, for 21 or 22, talk to me realistically about what we can contract so that we're both protected. Talk to me if you have laid off all your staff, if because of the changes in a lot of different laws, you're not going to have the same kind of service, or you're going to have the seals on the guest room door, like we used to see traveling to motels. Those of you who are old enough remember the seals on the toilets when they said they were clean. That I'm aging us, right? So,
I know it though. I know what you're
but
talking
I know some of the people who are here, so I know they get it. So I think that it's tell us more now than ever what the capabilities are, and not. And I have to, this is not on topic, but I made myself a note. I did see in the scrolling early on that there's somebody here from my hometown of Dayton, Ohio. So my request of you is to go eat Semester Price for me. Because, you know, it doesn't ship well this time of the year, but just go eat some. I prefer the dark with nuts, just in case you wonder.
Let me just add to a lot of what has been said is right on the dot of how I think, and but from some practical standpoints as well. So I think that trying to pretend like this isn't happening isn't genuine. I think recognizing what we are all facing is important. But I would give these three notions. One is educate yourself. Stay on top of trends, new policy guidelines that are being handed down by your province, your state, your local government, your national government. I know today there were just some new CDC guidelines that came out. I don't even know what they are. That has to do with testing here in the United States. But I think you should always take time to do an environmental scan of what is happening. That's part of the nimbleness, right? So is being current. Second, I want to talk about that internal navigation system that Cynthia spoke about. If you know the people you serve, generally, you understand what's important. You have a product, and the people who tend to use your product because you have a particular need or solution for them. And understanding that, I guess let me give an example. I would love to say that, Joan, mark this down, that the pivot that Unique Venues made in March was based on something scientific, but it was actually based on our internal navigation system. See, because we understand and recognize certain things about the types of venues that we work with and the types of people who book those venues. And so because of that, we had an intuitive reaction to the crisis that led us to certain points of how we communicate during this time, how we do outreach, how we blog, our posts on social. Just all of our communication is based on that intuition that's based upon experience, right? So I think that's something really, really important to also remember, is that trust your intuition but the most important part is trust your intuition about what the people you serve may want or need or require from you, as opposed to your intuition about what you need or want to require. Don't forget about what you need or want to require, but in a time like this, I think it's time to really use your intuition about the people you serve.
So we have a couple of questions bubbling up here that Corey's flagged for me, but I'm gonna ask one more to kind of close out this thread. And again, it's wonderful to have such great experts on, because we're just kind of rolling through these questions without me having to ask them. But we do know that we have some venues and planners out there that express to us regularly that they're somewhat paralyzed, because it seems like things change every day, or they're just not sure what to tell people, that they're not saying anything. So is there a danger in not saying anything right now? And if so, what are some strategies or ways that people can think about communicating with their audiences? Joan?
Yeah, I can tell you from my experiences right now. I'm checking in with the salespeople that I have been working with who have been furloughed to see how they are. I think that it's a very simple thing to ask someone how they're doing. And mean it. You know, I think that most of us are used to saying, how are you? Expecting, fine, thanks, how are you? And then I usually follow up with, how are you really? And if you know the circumstances, to me, that's a way to do it. Please don't come to ask any of us what year we're booking meetings if you're in sales. And if you're a person who's planning meetings, you know, I think the advice of, Chuck, what you said about being educated about what's going on in wherever the venue is, I think that that's an important piece of it. So I think it's, you know, the kinds of calls I like are when people start with, do you have time to talk? Is this a good time? That hasn't changed. And I think highlighting what is going on, and you're right, I mean, I live in DC, in the District of Columbia. When we all got on early and Chuck asked me how things were, I'm right downtown. It's incredibly quiet and it's frightening. I mean, frightening in the sense that the businesses that have closed. So if there are things that are different, tell me they're different, me, the customer. If you, the planner, don't explain to the venues you're working with that, you know, no, you're not yet planning for next year, or you don't know what you're going to do, or you don't have the authority yet, explain it. So to me, it's, you know, what I think I found is that part of what I'm about to say has a lot to do with what happened, that is happening with Black Lives Matter. People are having deeper, different conversations. I also think because most of us are at home, people with children are dealing with educating children. Life is not okay right now. And so I think that if we can have those sort of the intimate conversations that we never had before, to the point that anybody's willing to share, those are the conversations to have.
Yeah, we talk about this moment also. We've been calling it kind of this human moment, right? Where it's always been true that what makes up an organization are the human beings that are employed or part of the group. But we used to pretend that you could kind of separate the two, right? We had work-life balance. We had ways of, like, we didn't want to know there were things that weren't tolerated in the office and so forth. And one of the things that the pandemic has brought us to is this moment of reckoning that actually the success of organizations and the success of the individuals, they're intertwined, right? And so I really love, Joan, what you said about let's acknowledge that in this human moment, we're all feeling really vulnerable. We're feeling vulnerable as employees, as employers, or oh, sorry, do you want to say something?
No, no, you stopped for a minute. I was trying.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. The other thing I wanted to say about it is, the world is really transparent today, right? We used to have a business and we used to be able to paint it the outside, whatever color we liked, and we wanted people to like, and we called that a brand, right? But today, business is like a glass box, and people we're talking to, they can see into it because we have social media and we have Zoom, and you can see my dog and my husband, and you can, there's this transparency that is happening now that is an opportunity for us to connect around our shared humanity. And so there's no right thing to say. Like, there's no way to take the message and paint it in a particular way. It's more about just being back to the authenticity, and also transparency is the other thing I would add to that.
I'm in sales and marketing. That's my group. So I'm going to talk a little bit from that perspective. So I want you to imagine for a moment, as a consumer, that someone who has been an affiliate of yours, as somebody who sells to you, who wants you to use their product, goes silent on you for several months, and then all of a sudden shows up when things look good and wants you to do business with them. Your probable reaction might be something that I'm about to refer to from a Facebook post that I saw yesterday from one of our very dear clients. And their post said, "Oh my gosh, the people trying to profit off of us right now is getting ridiculous. No, I don't want your certification. I don't want your webinar. I don't want your call list. I don't want your magic product that you're pushing today. We needed you in March, April, and May, not now. Other people have done it." Now, my point of sharing that with you is that you're not a helper. Mr. Rogers always said, look for the helpers. Some people look for heroes. Heroes and helpers don't show up after the heroics have taken place, after the helping has taken place. So to be silent is going to land you in a spot of who? They're going to take you out of that whole chain of thought is people really, this is such a cliche, but people do business with people. The products are important, but when there's a lot of products out there in a really crowded marketplace, people are looking for signposts that they trust. So I just feel like that's a really important thing I wanted to share from a perspective as somebody who, I do rely on making sure that we are helping the people that we are charged with helping in the business that we're in. So
Chuck, I want to jump in on that, because I had thought about this earlier today and I made lots of other notes and didn't write this one. What I think, again, the unique venues properties are able to do, first of all, most of the properties have better connectivity than hotels do, and or differently, or they are more suited, and perhaps can charge better prices. How's that? I'm not going to say lower, I'm going to say better. One of the things that we all who are trying to do virtual events are running into is there are a whole lot of people who are marketing themselves as experts, and they're not. And the second is that if you become really understanding about how to deliver virtual education, and there's so much great information out there from educators about how to do this. I mean, if you look at, for those of you who are on campuses, You have great resources. In fact, I interviewed and just got an email this morning from Gabriel Radbansky, who's a psychology professor at Notre Dame. And you've got people like that on campuses to rely on, that you can understand better how to create a fabulous virtual experience. That's number one. And then number two is understand what your clients need. So this is the time to ask the questions. Sadly, and I would say this to my planner colleagues, I don't think our RFPs are very good generally when we send them out. I think we need to ask better questions, and we need to be more specific. And now especially, because I don't think that somebody asked the question about, how does this differ from 9/11 in terms of the pandemic versus the return to what we were? I think, first of all, it is entirely different. We were dealing then with a fear of flying. And then we saw what could be put in place. Right now, I literally look out my window, and if I see probably pollen flying, what I see is COVID flying. And there are people like me who are very at risk. And so we're not going out. So understand the audience and understand what you can do. And I don't think that we are going. I did a meeting in October, I believe, of 2001 in Canada for a client that had planned it. They went ahead with it. The attendance was great. Right now, we're not seeing that pickup. I just saw that PCMA is going to have what appears to be a hybrid meeting in January. So no, it's not the same. We're not coming back in the same way.
And I think it's a perfect timing as well, because Corey just shared the poll results. And if you haven't looked at them, take a look at them. We intentionally kind of asked, what happened with events prior to now? And a lot of them were canceled completely, and a little bit was transitioned to hybrid or virtual. But what we're seeing for September through December is that more are going forward. There's still some being canceled because some people are still struggling with how to make this work, but more people are figuring out how to make it a virtual one, or do it in a hybrid. And even a few, like, there's an uptick in-person events. And so again, I think to your point, Joan, there's a lot to figure out in this, whereas in 9/11 it was, how do we make sure that we're safer when we get on a plane and something like this can't be repeated? And I couldn't agree more. So again, if you're in the audience and you haven't looked at the poll results, take a look at them. I think they're pretty telling about where we're at as an industry. I want to transition really quick to a couple questions around brand, because again, we have an excellent expert with us today in Cynthia. And as you pointed out before, this is a great time for people to be working on those things that you normally wouldn't have time to work on, right? This is the time that you can pay attention to higher level thinking about strategy and brand and marketing and outreach. And so, Cynthia, could you talk a little bit about kind of clients that you work with for brand, to create brand reassurance and messaging that kind of sets them up as a trusted resource, again, making sure that we're building confidence? And are there certain kinds of archetypes that are successful at a time like this?
Okay. So let me start by saying that we are seeing people that are using the timeout to revisit kind of how are they positioned and how are they positioning themselves. I think there's a couple other aspects that are contributing to that. One is downtime. One is organizational leaders that are looking for how do they support their teams and their organizations through this. And so how do we pull our group together around who it is and what we stand for? And, I saw an article yesterday put out by KPMG that said purpose, which was a hot topic in January. It's a hot topic coming off over the past year because the business roundtable, some really big businesses started to say, hey, business is not just about making a profit, and started recognizing that purpose is a big part of why organizations exist, and how do we make that an important aspect for business leaders to fulfill kind of a purpose thing. So we kind of had this trend happening in a lot of different ways in the background. And now we've got this crisis where, like, oh, think about the, you know, the shoes of the leader of an organization. And I mean, what tremendous.
Oh.
Let's.
Going and so forth. And so they're looking, did I freeze again? Tell me when I'm back.
After what tremendous.
You're back. You're
Oh,
back.
you know, it's so funny. I don't usually have problems. I apologize. I just think that there's sort of the moment we're in that, again, is very human, where people are wanting to know, what is your organization all about? You asked a question, Joel, about brand archetype, and I'm not sure that everybody's familiar with that as a framework. So the work, I don't know if you could possibly put that screen up for a second, but one of the big things when you are trying to get a group of people to talk about purpose, to talk about brand, to talk about what they stand for, to have something to like hook into that is part of how we express our internal navigation system. The particular framework, you need a framework. You need something that gives us a shared language, that gives us a shared concept that we can build consensus around. So I can't see your slide, but I might not be looking in the right spot.
I'm seeing it, so it should be being
Okay,
displayed
well,
to
all
the
right.
audience.
I know them anyway, but I just asked if you would put it up, because the framework that we use is actually a framework that's built around telling stories. And so, you know, here's 12, we call them archetype. And the way to understand archetype is that it is a universal story that gives people a shortcut, a quick way to understand, you know, what storyline are we in. And so these 12 archetypes are very universally relevant. You know, when you might even just look at the 12 and say, oh, you know, in our organization, the sage is really important, or the every person is really important. And so I share that from the standpoint of, you asked which brand archetypes are and I'm going to say there is no better brand archetype than the ones that you authentically express. So when we work with organizations around identifying what stories, what archetypes are part of their DNA, part of how they show up, part of how they get the work done, part of how they relate to their employees and to their clients, there isn't a good or a bad archetype. There isn't a good or a bad culture. Rather, you could start to think that each of these human stories has positive attributes and has what we call a shadow side or a shadow tendency. So as we start to look at our culture and our brand through this framework, it gives us a language for looking at what's working for us, what do people appreciate about us. Chuck, I'll pull on the work we looked at with unique venues. I don't know, it's been a while, but the unique venues brand is built around two organizational cultural archetypes called the every person, which is about belonging, and the explorer, which is about finding things that are unique. And so I think I don't have to say too much more to say, how does that fit in terms of the organization that you're a part of? So it gives us a framework in which to, so there's not a good or a bad one. There's just that we know there are positive aspects to each of these human storylines, but they're just like regular human beings, like they're colorful, they're flawed, they're relatable. And so sometimes the work around culture and brand is looking at our shadows and looking at kind of the things we drag into the room with us without realizing it, and where can and how can we manage those in our reputation, in the experience that people are having with us.
I just want to say,
oh, go ahead, Chuck.
I look in my crystal ball, I see a future branding webinar with unique venues. Let's see how on target my crystal ball is.
I love.
I'll call you,
those,
Cynthia.
I love those graphical images, and I like even I've only been with Unique Venues since January, so it was news to me that you had worked with us. But I can really see how those two pieces connect together, and I could actually see in my former role when I was working at the University of Arizona the way different things of my style and our brand came together in those archetypes. And so I think that's really useful. Just kind of as a follow-up, are there things then I mean, obviously you engage in deep consultations with people to help create all of this stuff as you've done for unique venues in the past, but are there some small things that venues or planners could be doing now to at least be emphasizing or solidifying their brand and make sure that their messaging on that brand is not getting lost?
Yeah, great question. One of the reasons we use archetype is because archetypes show up in groups of people, like storylines show up in our organization, but they also show up in individual story, right? So just like unique venues may have certain archetypes, Chuck might also have different archetypal storylines that he expresses. And so one thing that I think is a powerful thing to be doing now is some team building work, some trust building work, and some opportunity to look at, because, you know, if you think about it, I said the individuals and organizations are intertwined. Who I am impacts who we are together on a team. And then that rolls up to an entire organizational culture. So I would encourage in this downtime, whether it's archetype or another system that allows us to get to know each other and to be able to show up, you know, as a complete human being and a complete human person that has shadows, that has fears, that has motivations, that right now, an important aspect of building brand is actually building team cohesion.
That's great advice. Thank you. Chuck, what about from the unique venues perspective? Are there things that venues or planners should be doing right now to kind of reinforce their brand and their messaging?
Yeah, I think one of the things we try to do is to let people know all of the things we learned about ourselves, and, you know, to take the time and determine what your belief statements are, and try to integrate what you truly believe as a company into training and onboarding every staff, but in all of your marketing, try to express those statements. I actually just pulled up, for those of you who get our newsletter every month, if you look at the top of our newsletter, it always says, at Unique Venues, we believe. If you don't fit in with the crowd, you belong here. And we believe in leveling out the playing field. We believe our uniqueness is what unites us. We believe the view from outside the box offers greater perspective, and on and on. So we say those. We still live what we learned from Cynthia through our own branding. And so each and everything that we communicate to someone, we make sure is in alignment with what we believe. So how we sell is in alignment with what we believe. It's about affiliation. It's about being a part of something. It's about being, you know, part of a league of our own. So what are your belief statements? Because if you can figure those out and live them and breathe them every day, you will naturally communicate those to your clients, and you will line up with people who are attracted to who you are as a brand.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, that when you do that kind of internal analysis that says, what is the unique culture of our organization and how do we express that in an authentic way, that kind of inside out look at your brand, it's got it stands the test of time, right? If you start with your essence and it kind of stands the test of time. And what I think I've watched you, Chuck, you know, over these past several months, there's a consistency to how you communicate. So even in this time of crisis, you are able very authentically to say, we're here for you because you're part of us, and those things come across in a really authentic way because they're so much part of the culture. So it gives you that, you know, we talk about culture and brand as something that should be operationalized. So it's not just the fluffy stuff that we put on our website, but how do we live it every day? How do we show up and sell in alignment with that, budget in alignment with that, communicate during a crisis in alignment with who we are?
I want to jump in on that. And as you both were talking about that, a couple of things occurred to me. One is that we haven't acknowledged while we've been talking, because the audience is people in sales, marketing, and other support positions, and certainly people who plan. And I think that one of the things that has hurt me the most during all of this has been that we haven't, as an industry wide, paid as much attention to the support staff, the house cleaners, and the banquet staff, and all the others. And so this is not part of the script. I'm going to make a shout out to having friends, I'm trying not to cry, who've lost their homes in California. Sharon, if you're still on, you know one of them. And that we're now looking at catastrophic flooding again in Houston. And so, Chuck, you only said it once, darn it. I had said that at the beginning that whoever said pivot or next new normal or anything else would have to do a donation to World Central Kitchen. I have no connection to them, except I think Jose Andres deserves sainthood. And so I would say that if you have a little extra money and you can give to World Central Kitchen right now, they will be, if they're not already on the ground where Laura's going. They certainly are in California, helping firefighters and people. And I think we need to remember that our industry is only supported because there are people who clean rooms and set rooms and do the work that is the hard work that keep our facilities and meetings going. And we need to remember them, especially now.
I love that, Joan. Yeah. I love that. So because there really are people out there. I mean, think about it. I just for a minute, imagine if you were told that your job that day was to, despite having rubber gloves and having face, you now need to go clean everything that everybody just bit on and touched their faces, then touched the tables. And these are the people that are such heroes. I was talking to a client yesterday, so just a quick, I was so proud, and this is an apolitical statement. I was so proud that a unique venues member was the host venue for the DNC convention. I would be equally happy if it was the RNC, so this is all apolitical. But to see that one of the 1,100 venues out of the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of potential places that could have been the host, that it was a place that we do business with every day. They had 150 people on site every day for 10 days. And a 24-hour day operation, feeding people 24 hours a day. And what they were talking about yesterday is, I was talking to the director of sales, and she talked to me about how she was doing sanitation. Just because there was so much to be done, and it's an enormous task. But she said, I was constantly cleaning, wiping things down, using chemicals and all of those things. And, that's a part, and sometimes people say, well, I don't feel like I could charge the same rate to rent my venue because there's only half the amount of people in there and twice the amount of work to make sure people are safe. That's the thing you have to remember, to make sure that people are safe. We're all going to find ourselves doing it at some point or the other.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely a reminder that we're all in this together. This is a crisis that impacts everybody at every level. It's not just a management crisis. It's not just a line staff crisis. It's not just it's not hotels. It's everybody, like everybody. We're all in this together, and we all need to rely on one another to support each other, to advocate for one another, and to collaborate like we're doing today across the industry, from people of all walks and all standings, to try to start to figure out what the solutions are out there. So
I want to
John,
say
go ahead.
one more thing that I think is a nice kind of silver lining to this. I don't know if everybody's experiencing this, but every week I'm finding some industry, some representative of the industry who wants to lock arms and do things together. And I like that, because for so long we've all been these little pockets of kind of, I'm going to do my thing, you do your thing, maybe we compete, maybe we don't compete, you know. But what I'm finding is that we're finding ways to work together to heal our industry. And I like that. So I think that's another thing I wanted to mention. So.
Great. Well, I know we're at time, and if you've been on our last panels, you know we rarely end right on time. So if our panelists have time for one more question, I'd love to shoot at it, because again, if you've been with us before, you know we normally try to end on a crystal ball question. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists, again, kind of hearkening back to some of our conversation today, if you can look into your crystal ball, how do you see meetings and events changing after the pandemic? What are some of the big things that, again, as we continue to go through how we talk to people and communicate with them and shape our brand, what are the things we have to be thinking about? Are there going to be less frequency events, fewer days in events, more local regional events, different ways to do trade shows? Are the purpose of our meetings going to change? Like, what do you see happening with the meetings and events industry if you look into your crystal ball and look out into 2021?
Oh, let me.
Go for it.
She's got a crystal ball.
I would say that my crystal ball is still broken, and it refuses to cooperate. That and my magic 8-ball, both, they're not working. I think that we have no idea. As I see that what clients are struggling with, I see what industry organizations are doing. I see that and what I hear in social media is that everybody's saying when there's a vaccine. Well, I say when there's a vaccine that the entire universe has access to and gets. I think we don't know. I think what we can do, I think we can plan differently. I think we can meet not with 6,000 people all crowded or 30,000 people all crowded together. I think that it's what I said early on. We have to begin to think of what, Sharon, thank you, the wheel and spoke, sort of, so that we can have something delivered in some way and bring people together in smaller groups to have those conversations. I think that we have to be aware of people's finances, because we may talk about the virus, but there's also a huge financial hit for people. So I think that we have to be far more creative and thinking about how people can gather, whether it is virtually, whether it is hybridly, no matter what it is, we've got to do it differently. And we have to come up with it, and we have to be the ones to suggest it and then continue to, and I don't know, Cynthia, my archetype was sage. So I know my strengths that actually fit what I think fits very well into my strengths. I think sage does too. So I think that what we have to do is we've got to do, we can't think that we're going back to anything from 2019. We've got to look forward and figure it out.
Great. Chuck or Cynthia?
Joan used my word after she didn't have a crystal ball, and my word was going to be creativity. And I think about it from the perspective of a lot of things in life and in our worlds have been broken for a long time. If we think about the economy overall, if we think about healthcare, if we think about poverty, if we think about how education is done, you know, there's a lot of things in the world that we do the way we do because it's how we've always done them. And I think this is an accelerated moment in time where all the things that are broken are now completely broken and fallen apart. And what it's going to take is us to step into the moment and to get really creative. I agree with Joan. The solutions for this industry should come out of this industry. But before well, think about all the industries like the music industry and how it's changed, the photography industry, you know, like technology, how it's changing industries. And to just say, if we could step out of fear and into a space of, you know, getting comfortable, finding our own inner navigation system and saying, what can I do and how can I contribute in this moment based on my own, what I have to offer.
Great. Chuck, final thoughts.
So I am an eternal optimist typically. So when I look into my crystal ball, see, because I hear every week about one of our really valued venues that is shutting their doors. I hear from planners who are, you know, looking for a job and asking me if I know any place or can I lead them anywhere. And I want to help, and I do. But my crystal ball requires me to look ahead and to believe in a narrative that I hold on to every day in my head, that there will be an end to this. And I don't know when that will be, and I don't know how it will come about, but I spend each day preparing for when that's about to happen. You know that song, Let's Get Ready to Rumble? Like they used to play that back in the 90s before every sporting event or whatever. I said in my head, I'm always thinking and changing those words, let's get ready to open, you know? And I don't know when that's going to be, but I just put one foot forward every day. I keep my pulse on what is happening. And we have to, I will leave you with saying, don't be stuck. Look forward and plan to thrive when this is all over. That's how I.
Great. Well, again, Joan, Cynthia, and Chuck, I want to thank you for being our expert panelists today. It was really one of the easiest moderated panels I've ever had to moderate. So thank you for that and the great dialogue. I know a lot of good engagement in the chat, and we will have good follow-up with the members, the attendees today. We'll share poll results and some of the other materials and links that were provided today. So I'll turn it over to Corey to bring us home.
Thanks, everyone. I was super engaged in that conversation. It was an honest conversation. I felt encouragement. I felt like there's a clearer path forward. So thanks for sharing your expertise. And thanks, everyone, as Joel mentioned, for participating in the Q&A and the chat box as well. Our September schedule for education is being finalized, so we will get that out to you all as soon as we can. So keep an eye on your inboxes for the next round of education. As always, it will be free. So we welcome you to register and participate for any session that is relevant to you and your team. Again, we have launched our UVAMC registration. I dropped the link in the chat, but you can also email me at Corey, C-O-R-E-Y, @uniquevenues.com if you'd like any more information. And as we go through our September sessions, I'm sure we will have a little bit more information for you that kind of highlights what that content will look like. So thanks so much, everyone. It's a little bit past 3 Eastern time, and we surely appreciate your participation in joining us for the last hour. Thank you to the panelists and for Joel for a great session. See you all next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.